Preparing maps when you don't know where your party is going next can be difficult. So in this video I'll give you some tips on how to prepare for a chaotic session where your players might go everywhere. In my last session, my players arrived back in time from a trip to the Feywild. And time in the Feywild can be a little wibbly wobbly, so suddenly they found themselves 2 weeks earlier in the city they started from. And now all the plots they've been living through, they've been adventuring, suddenly they could relive them again, but with the knowledge from the prior run. But that meant they could go anywhere. So I had a quite hard time preparing for that session, as you can imagine. I had already set up this harbor setting quite a while back, as you know from my previous videos. I've tweaked it a little since then, but I definitely had that map prepared. I wanted to run it for a long time, and it's a very important location in the town my players are at. So I did prepare this one, but I was quite certain that they wouldn't necessarily go there next. So there were two possible routes my players could take. Either they would go back to the beginning of their story, where they actually started, which was way outside of town in a totally different little village where they got their first adventuring tasks. Or they could try to unravel a conspiracy they've been tied up into. Having an important location of the place your players are at ready, even if it doesn't play a huge role in your campaign's story, can be an easy way to have your players run into action and get them on a path. So as I said, in my town, the harbor is an important place where a lot of action takes place. So there are the docks, for example, which this represents, but there's also a lot of taverns they frequent that are also located in the harbor. So if I don't want this to take place in the docks, I can just remove some of the parts from the map that represent docks and add something in that represents this more tavernous vibe. So I covered my bases with this map, but still, if they would have just moved out of town right away, I needed a backup. I'm getting to that backup at the end of this video. But the next thing I thought of doing was putting a new plot hook in that would drive them to a different location, where I knew where they would go. I wasn't certain that they would take that hook, so when my players started discussing where to go next, and were up in heated argument whether they should leave town or follow one of the other threads they were on, I let some guards walk by, and one of them overheard them talking about some missing corpses, something happening somewhere in the city. And as I hoped, at least one of them got up, tried to listen in, tried to find out more. So the second map I prepared for that plot hook. So I actually prepare my maps here, and then I take them apart and put them in these IKEA boxes for transport. So each map has their own box, ideally. It doesn't always fit. That's why I didn't put the harbor into its own box, because it would have needed multiple boxes. And as I know that at least one of my players is watching this channel from time to time, they already seen this map before, so I wasn't too worried of them spotting it. And I'm always reaffirming that there is no need to go to any place where a map is at. And I think that even if they spot a map, it doesn't bother me too much, because in real life, when they walk through a city, they might spot places that they find interesting to check out. So if they spot a map, it's just like walking by and seeing like, oh, this looks interesting, and then deciding to go there. So I don't feel that it's totally out of place in the world to check out places that you've accidentally stumbled on. So I don't mind them seeing maps, but I really don't want this to feel railroaded, so whenever possible, I put them into these white boxes. Opening up the box, you can see the map broken down in here. I try to keep it in as big as of the parts as possible, so putting it together on the table is very fast and the players don't have to wait too long. I always take photos of the maps when I am done preparing them, so I don't need to come up with the layout or am thinking too much about how the layout worked on the table, so I can just pull it up on my phone and reassemble it very quickly in a way that I intended. So I'll do that right now in order to be able to recreate this map. I also thought about having a folder where I keep all the map designs, so it's easier in the future to find them again, and I think I'll definitely do that. Oh yeah, there's one missing. It's here. Some of you might recognize this map as well because I've used it in prior videos. It's a design for a graveyard. I really like this tile piece, as it is adding a little dimension in another direction that you would expect. It's going into the plate instead of out of it, and I really like that design. I've just ordered a lot of yellow, orange and red translucent bricks from Lego. Because I want to experiment with lava pits next. So this design basically, but with lava flowing in or out of these holes. I'm really excited to receive those. Recently there was the Insider Days or Insider Weekend at Lego where you got double points for the Insiders program, and also there was Black Friday and so on. So I took the chance and ordered some stuff. As you can see, I stuck with the fixed pins. It's harder to assemble, but I quite like it. So a little update after a few weeks of usage, or a few months by now of usage, and I'm really glad I decided on going with this. The good thing is that your players don't know how you intended your map to be. So even if you don't get it quite right as you intended when you prepared it, still, I think that it doesn't really matter and no one will notice. And now for the last part, the small chapel on the side. So I knew my players would get to this location eventually, but I wasn't quite sure if it's in this session. So the second map I prepared, this graveyard with the little chapel, was a new story hook. And I think putting in new story hooks to guide your players when they don't have a certain goal where to go next opens up possibilities in one, but it also, if you know your players and you know, like, my players usually jump onto like the things I put in front of them. Like if I drop like the slightest hint, they're immediately getting onto that. I've done the mistake of not preparing for that because I thought like, okay, this is the first time I'm dropping this hint. Like they might not even notice. Maybe next time, maybe after I dropped a few. But what I've noticed is that when I drop a hint, when I put in a little plot hook, they immediately jump on it. So yeah, even though I wasn't certain they would jump right on it, there was a good chance. Spoiler alert, they actually did. This was the location we ended up on playing in the session. Some of you asked in the comments on how I use the maps in battle. And if you like, I can do a separate video on that where I go into the details. What I would like to know is, how familiar are you with D&D rules? Are you coming from the Lego side or from the D&D side? Like, should I explain more of the basic D&D rules as well, or are you totally familiar with that? Please leave some comments on that, because it really helps me plan videos that you would like. A quick thing though is, as you've seen, there's this multiple rooms in here with the chapel and the graveyard. So I started out with the graveyard on the table. When they started exploring that, at some point I asked if they wanted to see like for real where they were at and to plan, because they were thinking about hiding and they were asking about where they could hide. So I asked them if they wanted to see, and of course they said yes. And so I put out this part of the map. I explained to them that this is the entrance to the chapel, and so they wanted to go into the chapel. And once they opened the door and they went inside, I then added this section so they could see the whole layout together. Now, if your players don't take your plot hooks, there might still be other ways where they could go. And I think preparing another thing that's out there but a little more generic can be that rescue map that you pull out if everything else fails. And I mean, with this modular design, the good thing is it's quite easy to put together new maps right at the table if need be, but it stresses me out to need to come up with something on the spot. I don't like telling my players to leave the table for too long. And I think that something that takes more than 10 minutes maybe would be too long for me. So I like to be prepared, but there have been occasions where I needed to put something together real quick, and it works for everybody, I guess, but it stresses me out a little. I also keep the monsters that are relevant to a particular map inside these boxes, so I have quick access to a battle that's set up and everything is in one place. After the session, I just threw in my players here as well, just to pack it up quickly, but for preparation, I have the relevant monsters in here as well. Now the third map I prepared. In this one I have a collection of different minifigures that I can use for NPCs. For example, there is a collection of different guards that look to be the same faction in here. Some ghosts, some of my NPCs, some bandits. I've covered the whole setup in one of my other videos, so check that out. It's called NPCs and Enemies or something like that. That really helps me, like if I need to come up with a encounter on the spot. I have like different, more generic creatures and enemies at hand. I've also included my modular monster that I recently built, and I really want to try that out as soon as possible, so I had that ready as well. I think it's totally fine to run generic encounters from time to time. I try to avoid it as often as possible, but I think it's still cooler to have one encounter in each game, even if it's not a huge story or plot point. The reason why this is outdoors is because I knew there was an option that my players would head out of town, and so having something that feels out of town made sense. And also I already had prepared the docks, and the docks are in the city, so even if they ran into an encounter in another place of the city, taking apart the dock and putting it together in a different way to have that city vibe would have worked well. And also as I had the chapel and the docks, I didn't have any more gray pieces to build out a dungeon or something like that, or another city setup. So going for the outdoors was very practical. As you can see, this is quite a small map compared to the others, but for a generic encounter, I think it still works very well. I've authored a very interesting book that I want to talk on more in different videos. That's Flee Mortals. It's a new take by a different publisher on the monster manual with new rules for monsters to make encounters more action-oriented and more interesting. And I think that that's something that I really want to incorporate into my game. So I might talk about that in a future video once I've gotten to reading it more. I'm still in the introductory part. So preparing for a chaotic session can be a daunting task, but don't worry too much. Your players never know where you intended a place to be. So it's very easy to just use a map that you've meant for another place in the place they are going to. Action is happening where the players are going and not where you intended it to be in the first place. So don't worry too much about it. I hope this helps you prepare for your next sessions. Leave in the comments how familiar you are with D&D rules to help me plan my next videos, and I'm excited to see you in the next one. Bye!